Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Invitation to the Countryside. It was one of those tranquil mornings in early autumn when London seemed half asleep beneath a silvery mist. From his window in Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot, the celebrated Belgian detective, surveyed the world with contented eyes. Below him, the city murmured faintly, the distant rumble of an omnibus, the brisk footsteps of office clerks, and the faint cry of a newspaper boy calling out the morning's headlines. Poirot, immaculate as ever in a suit of dove grey, was engaged in the delicate business of trimming his famous moustache, a task he approached with the precision of a jeweller setting a diamond. Symmetry, mon ami, he murmured to his reflection, is the essence of order. And order, it is the foundation of all things, even of beauty. At that moment came the discreet ring of the doorbell. Poirot glanced up, frowning slightly. Few visitors called at so early an hour, and fewer still without appointment. He set down his silver scissors, smoothed his hair, and opened the door to find his elderly valet, George, bearing a silver tray upon which rested a single envelope of thick cream paper. "A letter, sir." "Special delivery," said George. "Arrived not 5 minutes ago." Poirot accepted it delicately between two fingers. The handwriting, fine and looping, was unfamiliar to him, but the crest embossed in gold at the top corner caught his eye, a dove in flight above a ring of laurels. Beneath it was inscribed Dovewood Hall, Surrey. "Ah," he said softly, "already it promises refinement. Let us see what mystery accompanies such elegance." Breaking the seal with his paper knife, Poirot unfolded the letter and began to read. "Monsieur Hercule Poirot, I beg of you to come to Dovewood Hall with all possible haste. A theft has occurred, a theft most strange and distressing. My family is in turmoil, and I fear scandal if the truth does not soon come to light. Scotland Yard has been discreet but unsuccessful. The object stolen is of immense value, both sentimental and historical. Please, monsieur, I implore your help. I can trust no one else. The Emerald of Alexandria, has vanished without a trace. Yours sincerely, Miranda, Lady of Dovewood Hall." Poirot read the letter twice through, his eyes gleaming with interest. "The Emerald of Alexandria," he repeated thoughtfully. "A name to conjure romance, history, and danger. And she writes, without a trace. ABN, Hastings. That is a phrase designed to awaken the grey cells. Unfortunately, Captain Hastings, Poirot's loyal friend and chronicler, was abroad in Argentina, and so Poirot addressed the empty air as though Hastings stood beside him, as he so often had. He rose briskly and paced the room, hands clasped behind his back. "Let us consider, my imaginary friend. A grand country house, a family gathering, a priceless jewel, and a theft committed with perfect neatness. No violence, no mess, only silence and disappearance. It has style, n'est-ce pas? It has finesse." Poirot turned to George. "Please have the Morning Post forwarded to me at Dovewood Hall. I shall take the 10 o'clock train to Surrey." "Very good, sir," said George, with the unruffled calm of a man long accustomed to Poirot's sudden departures. "Will you require your travelling valise?" Poirot nodded. "The small one, if you please. And do not forget the hair tonic. One must look impeccable even in the countryside, especially in the countryside, where the standards of elegance, alas, often decline." Within the hour, Poirot was seated comfortably in a first-class carriage of the London to Waverley line, a copy of the Times folded neatly beside him. The countryside rolled past in golds and russets, hedgerows turning crimson, fields strewn with the first fallen leaves. He admired the order of it all, the rhythm of the passing fences and the clean geometry of the farms. As the train slowed at the small station of Dovewood, Poirot gathered his things and stepped out into the crisp air. Waiting upon the platform was a liveried chauffeur holding a sign that read Monsieur Poirot. Behind him, a gleaming black motorcar waited, polished to perfection. "Lady Miranda sent me to fetch you, sir," said the chauffeur, touching his cap. Poirot inclined his head graciously. "Merci, my good man. And how long have you been in her ladyship's service, may I ask?" 14 years, sir. Never had a better mistress, begging your pardon. Though there's been queer goings-on lately, if I may say so. Ever since that emerald came back from the jeweller's for cleaning, well, the house hasn't been the same." "Indeed?" Poirot murmured, his eyes brightening. "Then perhaps the emerald has a story of its own." As the motorcar wound through narrow lanes bordered by ancient oaks, Dovewood Hall came into view, a great house of mellow stone, its tall chimneys rising above a sweep of green lawn. The building exuded a calm dignity, but beneath it Poirot sensed tension, as one might sense the hum beneath a taut violin string. Lady Miranda let and awaited him upon the broad front steps. She was a woman of about 50, handsome and dignified, with eyes that spoke of both intelligence and sorrow. Her gown, though simple, was of excellent taste, her pearls gleamed faintly against her pale throat. "Monsieur Poirot, I cannot express how grateful I am that you have come," she said, clasping his hands warmly. "You are our last hope." "Madam," Poirot replied, bowing slightly, "it is always a pleasure to serve the cause of truth, and, if I may say so, to enjoy the hospitality of a lady of refinement." A faint smile touched her lips, the first flicker of relief he had seen. "You are kind, monsieur. Please, come in. I will explain everything." She led him into a hall panelled in oak, where sunlight glinted upon portraits and polished armour. The air was faintly scented with lavender and old books. A fire burned low in the grate, though the morning was not cold. As she poured him tea, Lady Miranda began her account. "The emerald was once the property of my great-grandfather," she said quietly. "It is called the Emerald of Alexandria. Legend says it was taken from a temple in Egypt centuries ago, during Napoleon's campaign. It has been in our family for over 100 years. I had it cleaned and reset in London recently, and it was returned to me only last week." She paused, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted her cup. "2 nights ago, I held a small dinner for some old friends and relatives. After dinner, we viewed the emerald in its glass case in the drawing room. It was locked securely when I retired. The next morning, it was gone." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "No broken locks, no smashed windows, no footprints, I presume?" "None," she confirmed. "The case was intact. The key had never left my possession, or so I believed." Poirot set down his cup gently. "You have already consulted the police, madam?" "Yes. Inspector Avery from Scotland Yard. He was very polite, but he found nothing. He said it must have been someone within the house. That is what frightens me most." Poirot rose slowly and looked about the room, the careful symmetry of the furniture, the precise arrangement of flowers, the sense of order disrupted by fear. "You are right to be afraid, Lady Miranda. Not of the theft itself, that is but an act, but of what lies beneath it. To steal without trace, one must not only be clever. One must be trusted." He turned back to her, his expression softening. "I shall find your emerald, madam. But before I do, I must first meet your household, for in every perfect crime, there is always a single imperfection. It is my business to find it." Lady Miranda's shoulders straightened slightly, hope flickering once more. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I will summon the others at once." And as she left the room, Poirot stood by the tall window, gazing out at the quiet gardens of Dovewood Hall. A vanished jewel, he murmured to himself, a house of secrets, and a lady who fears her own guests. Ah, but this promises to be most instructive for the little grey cells. Chapter 2, Dovewood Hall and its guests. Lady Miranda led Hercule Poirot through a long corridor hung with portraits of solemn ancestors. Their painted eyes seemed to follow him as he passed, lieutenants of every generation, warriors, politicians, poets, and, judging by the faintly sardonic expressions on some of the faces, perhaps one or two mischief-makers as well. The floor gleamed from recent polishing, and the faint scent of beeswax lingered in the air. At the end of the hall, they entered the morning room, where sunlight fell through high windows onto the pale blue carpet. Lady Miranda gestured gracefully toward a group of people gathered about the hearth. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "allow me to present the guests who were in the house on the night of the theft. You will wish to speak to each, I am sure." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, madam. The human element, it is always the most instructive." The group turned as he entered, curiosity and unease flickering across their faces. Poirot took them in at a glance, noting posture, tone, and the subtle unspoken language of glances exchanged. Closest to the fire stood Colonel Arthur Penrose, a broad-shouldered man with a bristling grey moustache and the weathered skin of one long accustomed to sun and discipline. His stance was upright, his manner bluff, but his eyes were kind. "Colonel Penrose," Lady Miranda explained, "is an old friend of my late husband's. He was with us for the weekend." "Delighted, sir," the colonel said gruffly, shaking Poirot's hand. "Dashed unpleasant business, this. Can't think how the thing was done. Not a clue anywhere." Poirot smiled politely. "You will forgive me, Colonel, if I prefer to believe that clues exist, only they hide themselves, like small children, behind the curtains." A faint chuckle ran through the group, and Poirot turned to the next person, a young woman seated at the window with a sketchbook upon her lap. She had an air of quiet self-possession, her fair hair drawn neatly back, her eyes intelligent and observant. "Miss Eleanor Vale," said Lady Miranda. "An artist. She has been painting the gardens for me." Miss Vale rose, colouring slightly. "I only hope my sketches have not been a distraction." "It's dreadful, Lady Miranda, what's happened? I wish I could have done something to prevent it." Poirot's head tilted slightly. "Mademoiselle, an artist sees more than others. Sometimes she observes what even the policeman's lantern cannot illuminate. You have good eyes, I think." The young woman smiled faintly, uncertain whether she was being complimented or examined. By the sideboard stood a tall, dark-haired man in his 30s, elegantly dressed but with a faint air of impatience. His gaze, quick and appraising, met Poirot's with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "My nephew, Mr. Charles Lytton," Lady Miranda said. "He is my late brother's son, my heir." "How do you do, Mr. Poirot," said Charles, with a hint of irony. "I suppose we're all suspects in your eyes." Poirot's expression did not change. "In my eyes, monsieur, all are possibilities. It is for reason to decide which possibility becomes truth." Charles gave a short laugh and turned away to stir the fire. Poirot noted that his fingers tapped restlessly against the mantelpiece, a small but telling rhythm. Next, Lady Miranda indicated a mild-looking gentleman with thinning hair and pince-nez glasses. "Dr. Felix Grant, a dear friend of the family, and my late husband's physician." The doctor bowed slightly. "You must think this a very unorthodox case for a family doctor to involve himself in, Mr. Poirot. But you see, I've known Lady Miranda since childhood. We are all anxious to see this matter resolved." Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. "You, too, were present on the night of the dinner?" "Yes. I believe I retired early. I have a habit of taking long walks before bed. I find them beneficial to the nerves." Ah! Poirot's eyebrow lifted almost imperceptibly. The night air, it clears the head but sometimes clouds the truth, does it not? Dr. Grant gave a nervous little laugh and adjusted his spectacles. Finally, Lady Miranda turned to a woman standing somewhat apart from the others, a woman of middle age, with neat greying hair and the rigid posture of one who ran her household with quiet authority. "Mrs. Beatrice Hume, my housekeeper," said Lady Miranda. "She has been with me for 20 years. Mrs. Hume curtsied slightly. "I'll do all I can to assist you, sir. But it's beyond me how that jewel could vanish. I lock the house myself every night. Nothing goes amiss under my roof, or never has before." Poirot regarded her kindly. "You take great pride in your duty, madam. That is admirable. It is always the honest people who suffer most from dishonesty around them." He allowed a pause to fall, feeling the unease settle into the room like fine dust. "If I may, Lady Miranda," he said, "perhaps you could show me the scene of the crime." They crossed into the drawing-room, a noble chamber filled with pale afternoon light. On a table at the far end stood a glass display case, its contents now empty. Poirot approached it reverently, his eyes tracing every line and reflection. Lady Miranda spoke softly. Here it was, the Emerald of Alexandria. It was displayed in this case during dinner. I locked it myself, with this key. She drew a small silver key from a ribbon about her neck. The next morning, the emerald was gone. Poirot examined the lock with a jeweller's lens, bending close enough for his breath to mist the glass. "No damage," he murmured. "The thief used a key, or something made to resemble one." He turned suddenly. "Madam, who besides yourself knew where this key was kept?" "No one." "At least?" "I believe not." Poirot's gaze moved slowly from face to face. The Colonel stared steadfastly out of the window. Dr. Grant busied himself polishing his glasses. Charles Lytton looked amused. Miss Vale seemed nervous. Mrs. Hume's lips were pressed tightly together. "The case was cleaned recently," Poirot said. "Perhaps the servants touched it then." "Only under my supervision," said Mrs. Hume firmly. "I was there the whole time." "Good. And the window, always locked?" "Every night, sir." Poirot nodded slowly, pacing around the room. "There are many kinds of locks, Miss Amis. Those made of metal, and those made of trust. The thief, I think, did not break the first but betrayed the second." Lady Miranda looked at him anxiously. "Then you believe it was someone in the house?" Poirot gave a small bow. "I believe, madam, that every closed circle hides its own solution. The world, you see, is full of strangers, but it is among friends that the cleverest crimes are born." When the guests had gone to their rooms, Poirot remained alone in the drawing-room. He stood very still, his fingertips lightly touching the surface of the glass case. "A thief who leaves no trace," he murmured. "Either he is a genius, or he knows the house too well to need a trace." He noticed a faint smudge upon the lower corner of the glass, hardly visible, like a brushstroke of dust. From his pocket, Poirot produced a small white card and gently pressed it against the mark. When he lifted it, a delicate curve appeared, a partial fingerprint. He smiled. "Ah, mon petit signe, my little sign. You will speak, perhaps, when the others are silent." Stepping back, he surveyed the room once more, the fine furniture, the quiet ticking of the clock, the polished order disturbed only by that single, telling absence. "The emerald is gone," he said softly, "but order, that, I shall restore." And with that, Hercule Poirot adjusted his cuffs, cast one final glance at the empty case, and followed the faint scent of lavender down the corridor to dinner, where the first of many small lies would soon begin to unfold. Chapter 3: The Locked Case. Dinner that evening at Dovewood Hall was a strangely subdued affair. The long mahogany table glittered with silver and crystal, yet the conversation flowed only in uneasy spurts, like a stream interrupted by stones. The great chandelier above cast a mellow glow, illuminating faces that smiled politely but never quite relaxed. Hercule Poirot, seated beside Lady Miranda at the head of the table, took in every word, gesture, and hesitation. He listened not merely with his ears, but with what he often called his little grey cells, those unseen instruments that detected disorder even where the eye saw only calm. Lady Miranda did her best to keep the atmosphere cordial. "I hope the pheasant is to your liking, Colonel," she said, though her voice carried an undertone of strain. The Colonel cleared his throat. "Excellent, my dear lady, excellent. Though I can't say much appetite remains for any of us, eh? Not while that scoundrel goes free." He glanced down the table toward Charles Lytton, who had been silently buttering a roll with unnecessary precision. Charles looked up coolly. "You make it sound as though the thief were among us, Colonel." "Perhaps he is," growled the older man. "If not, how else could it have been done?" Lady Miranda's spoon clinked gently against her plate. "Please, Arthur, let us not quarrel. Monsieur Poirot will find the truth, I am sure of it." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Ah, but the truth, madam, is not always a polite guest. When it arrives, it may disturb the harmony of the table." Miss Eleanor Vale, sitting opposite him, looked faintly distressed. "It's horrid to think someone here might have done it." And yet, she broke off, colouring. "Continue, mademoiselle," said Poirot softly. "You were about to say something." "I only meant," she faltered, "that when I was sketching in the garden after dinner, I thought I saw a shadow pass by the terrace window. I assumed it was one of the servants closing up the house." "Interesting," murmured Poirot. "And what hour was that, may I ask?" "Oh, perhaps 9:30. I remember because the clock in the hall struck as I gathered my pencils." Colonel Penrose gave a snort. "Could have been anyone taking a breath of air before bed. Can't see how that helps." "Every small thing helps, mon Colonel," said Poirot calmly. "It is like embroidery, one must look at the tiny stitches if one is to understand the whole pattern." After dinner, Lady Miranda led Poirot once more into the drawing-room, where the empty glass case still stood like a monument to absence. A faint reflection of firelight shimmered across its surface. "I have not allowed anyone to touch it," she said quietly. "Since the theft, it has remained exactly as the inspector left it." Poirot nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Preservation of the scene du crime is essential. Let us examine, if we may, the lock itself." He knelt gracefully, no easy feat for a man of his dignity, and took from his pocket a small magnifying glass and a pair of fine tweezers. Lady Miranda watched as he examined every inch of the silver clasp and hinge. "No sign of force," he murmured. "No scratches, no bruising of the metal. The thief used a key, and one that fitted perfectly." "But that's impossible," she exclaimed. "There is only one key, and it never leaves this ribbon around my neck." Poirot looked up at her gently. "Madam, forgive me, but we must be open to every possibility. Keys may be copied, locks may be studied. It requires only patience, a little wax, and opportunity." She stared at him, troubled. "You mean, someone may have made a duplicate?" "Just so. Someone who had access to the key, even for a moment. Tell me, did you ever show it to anyone? Perhaps when speaking of the emerald." Lady Miranda hesitated. "Well, yes, I recall showing it to Miss Vale. She was admiring the setting of the emerald and asked about the case that held it. I remember laughing and saying it was as safe as the Tower of London. She seemed interested in how the lock worked." "Ah." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And what did you do then?" "I took out the key to show her. Only for a second, of course. Poirot smiled faintly. A second, madam, is sometimes all that is needed, to observe, to remember, or even to press a small impression into soft wax. Lady Miranda looked genuinely dismayed. But she's just a girl, and so gentle. Surely you can't suspect her? Poirot raised a hand. I suspect no one, I only notice. And I notice, madam, that the young artist has hands that are steady and eyes that see very precisely. Such qualities are useful not only in painting but also in other crafts. He straightened up, brushing an invisible speck from his immaculate sleeve. Now, let us think of something else. The thief took a great risk. A case in a room such as this, it would take time to open it quietly, time to remove the emerald, and time to lock it again. Yet no one heard a sound. No, said Lady Miranda. Not one of us. Poirot nodded slowly. Then we must ask, why such calm? Why no haste? Because the thief knew there would be no interruption. Which means, madam, that he, or she, knew precisely where each person was at the time. The next morning dawned pale and misty. Poirot breakfasted alone, eating toast with precision and reading the Times from end to end. When he had finished, he folded the paper exactly and rose. It was time to question the household. He began with Mrs. Hume, the housekeeper, whom he found in her small but spotless sitting room, darning a pair of gloves. She stood immediately upon his entrance. "Good morning, madam," said Poirot pleasantly. "You were on duty, I believe, the night of the dinner." "Always, sir. I never go to bed till the house is secure." "And at what hour was that?" "About 10:30, sir. I made my rounds, checked all windows and doors, and saw the drawing-room locked." "You saw the case?" "Yes, sir. Everything was just as Lady Miranda left it." Poirot regarded her thoughtfully. "And you are quite certain that no one could have entered afterwards?" "Quite certain," said Mrs. Hume firmly. "I'd stake my life on it." "Then perhaps someone was already inside," murmured Poirot, almost to himself. She frowned. "You mean, someone hid in the room?" "Perhaps," he said mildly. "Or perhaps the theft occurred earlier than we think." Later, in the garden, Poirot found Miss Vale sketching among the autumn flowers. She looked up, startled, as his neat shadow fell across her page. "Mademoiselle," he said, bowing slightly, "you have a gift. You see much with those eyes of yours." "I only draw what's before me," she said modestly. "Ah, but what was before you that night, when you sketched from the terrace?" "A shadow, you said. Perhaps you remember now whether it was tall or short. Did it move quickly or with caution?" Miss Vale hesitated. "It was slender, I think, and moved very quietly. I assumed it was Lady Miranda, perhaps checking the windows." Poirot nodded, his gaze kind but penetrating. "Memory, mademoiselle, is like paint, it fades, it changes tone, yet the outline remains." "I thank you. You have helped more than you know." He left her to her work and strolled slowly back to the house, the gravel crunching beneath his patent leather shoes. His eyes were half closed, his mind alive. "So," he murmured, a lock opened without force, a case relocked, and an emerald vanished in silence. No one saw, no one heard. Yet, somewhere, one person knows exactly how it was done. As he ascended the steps of Dovewood Hall, the faintest smile curved his lips. "It is always the key, mon ami Hastings, always the key." Chapter 4, The Alibi Tangle. By the following morning, a chill drizzle had descended upon Dovewood Hall, drawing a mist across the lawns and silvering the bare branches of the trees. The great house stood silent beneath the grey sky, its chimneys trailing thin lines of smoke like questions rising without answers. At precisely 9:30, Hercule Poirot appeared in the breakfast room, immaculate as always in a dark suit and perfectly polished shoes. Lady Miranda greeted him with a wan smile over her teacup. "I hardly slept, Monsieur Poirot," she confessed. "The uncertainty gnaws at me. To sit at table with those one has known for years, and to wonder whom one can trust, it is unbearable." Poirot inclined his head sympathetically. "Courage, madam. The truth, it is like the dawn, it hides behind the clouds, but it cannot be prevented from rising." He took a single boiled egg, examined it as though it might hold a clue, and tapped it delicately with his spoon. "Today," he said thoughtfully, "we bring a little order to this chaos. I must ask that everyone assemble in the drawing room after breakfast. It is time, as they say, to compare our stories." Lady Miranda's eyes widened slightly. "You mean, you wish to question them all at once?" "Mais oui," said Poirot. "A conversation shared is often more revealing than an interrogation apart. People contradict one another, they hesitate, and in that hesitation, la vérité begins to emerge." Shortly after 10, the household gathered once again before the cold gleam of the empty display case. A fire crackled in the grate, throwing restless shadows upon the carpet. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small frame radiating calm authority. "Miss Amos," he began, his accent lending the words a precise rhythm, "the disappearance of the Emerald of Alexandria has brought distress to all present. Yet it is not by suspicion that we shall find the truth, but by reason. Therefore, I ask only for honesty and patience." He drew out his pocket watch, glanced at it briefly, and continued, "We will begin by reconstructing the evening of the theft. From 9 o'clock until 10, each of you will tell me where you were and what you did. We shall see, perhaps, how the pieces of the puzzle fit together. Colonel Penrose." The colonel was first. Standing squarely with his hands behind his back, he spoke with brisk precision. "After dinner, I went to the library," he said. "Took down a book on the Peninsular War, Wellington's campaigns, you know. Sat there reading until I heard the clock strike 10. Poirot nodded. "Did anyone see you there, mon colonel?" Penrose frowned. "I believe not. But I was certainly there." "And you left the library only once?" "Yes, to fetch a cigar from the humidor in the billiard room. I encountered no one." Poirot tapped his fingertips together. "A solitary evening, then." "Thank you, Colonel." Miss Eleanor Vale. Next came the young artist. She looked pale and nervous as all eyes turned to her. After dinner, she said softly, "I went out to the terrace to fetch my sketchbook. I had left it there earlier, on a bench by the rose garden. I was gone only a few minutes. Then I came back to the drawing room to collect my shawl, but no one was here. I thought everyone had retired. I went up to my room soon after." Poirot regarded her gently. "You are certain, mademoiselle, that no one was in the drawing room when you returned?" She hesitated. "It was dimly lit, only the fire burning low. But I think, yes, I saw a movement near the far window. A shadow, perhaps." "A shadow?" Poirot repeated softly. "And you took it for whom?" "I thought it was Lady Miranda," she said quickly, glancing at her hostess. "She often looks in before bed to see the fires are safe." Poirot inclined his head. "Très bien, mademoiselle. You are observant. That will be useful. Dr. Felix Grant." The doctor adjusted his spectacles as he spoke. "After dinner, I walked in the gardens, a habit of mine. Fresh air clears the mind. I remember the moon was bright for a time, though clouds came later." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Did you pass near the terrace?" "I may have done," said the doctor uneasily. "It was quite still. I heard no one." And when you returned? About 10 o'clock. I went straight to my room. Poirot made a small note. And you saw no light in the drawing room as you passed? No, said the doctor, after a pause that was just a second too long. Mr. Charles Lytton. Charles Lytton lounged against the mantelpiece, outwardly calm, but his fingers played restlessly with his cigarette case. I was in the billiard room, he said. I often play a few games alone before bed. Ask the servants, they would have heard me. The balls make enough noise. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Ah, yes. A solitary game of billiards, most relaxing, I am sure. You did not notice the doctor passing by for his cigar. Did he say that? Charles smiled faintly. I must have stepped out for a moment. Needed some air myself. Poirot's gaze rested on him a moment longer than necessary. Indeed, he said mildly. The air of the billiard room, or the terrace, perhaps. Charles met his eyes squarely. What are you suggesting? Nothing, yet, said Poirot smoothly. Continue. I went up to bed just before 10. That's all. Mrs. Beatrice Hume. At last the housekeeper spoke. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clasped tightly together. I was making my rounds, sir. I checked all the rooms, drawing room, dining room, study, library. Everything was in order. I locked the doors at 10:30, as always. You saw no one? No, sir. The house was quiet. Poirot tilted his head. And the drawing room, was it lit? The lamps were out, but the fire still burned. The glass case was there, untouched. Untouched? Poirot repeated. You are sure? Yes, sir, she said firmly. I would swear to it. When all had spoken, Poirot stood for a moment in silence, gazing thoughtfully at the empty case. The only sound was the ticking of the clock and the soft hiss of the fire. Let us see, he said at last. Between 9 and 10, the Colonel read alone in the library, unseen. Miss Vale went to the terrace and back, and saw a shadow. Dr. Grant walked in the garden, passing perhaps near the terrace. Mr. Lytton played billiards, or so he says. Mrs. Hume made her rounds and found all in order. Each has an alibi, yet none that can be confirmed. He looked up, his eyes gleaming. It is a tapestry woven entirely of solitude. Each person, alone and unseen, a most convenient arrangement for a thief, n'est-ce pas? A faint ripple of discomfort stirred the room. Lady Miranda clasped her hands together nervously. You think they are all lying? Poirot spread his hands. Not lying, madam, merely protecting. Sometimes people protect themselves, sometimes others. The truth hides beneath the motive. He moved to the window, looking out at the rain beading upon the glass. A theft without force. A lock opened and relocked. A shadow on the terrace. And silence, perfect silence. There is something too neat, too smooth, about this affair. Turning back, he smiled faintly. We shall not find our thief in broken locks or footprints, no. We shall find them in a word half-spoken, or in a silence that speaks too loudly. Lady Miranda looked at him anxiously. Then you have a suspect. Poirot bowed slightly. I have a theory, madam, a small one. It may be wrong, it may be right. But I think the thief is among us still, and I think they are very afraid. That evening, as darkness fell once more over Dovewood Hall, Poirot sat alone by the fire, deep in thought. The case before him was no longer merely a theft, it was a web of secrets, spun with precision and concealed beneath politeness. He smiled faintly to himself. Soon, he whispered, the pattern will emerge. It always does. Chapter 5. The Curious Sketch. The next morning dawned cold and brittle, the mist of the previous day now replaced by a pale frost that glimmered faintly on the lawns. Inside Dovewood Hall, the air was tense. Even the servants moved quietly, as though fearing to disturb the uneasy peace that had settled since the theft. Poirot appeared punctually for breakfast, immaculate in a dove-grey suit, his moustache immaculate despite the chill. Lady Miranda looked pale but composed, and the others sat in subdued silence, each absorbed, it seemed, in private thought. Poirot buttered a piece of toast with his usual precision and addressed Lady Miranda. "Madam, I should like very much to see the gallery adjoining the morning room. I understand many of Miss Vale's sketches are kept there." Lady Miranda nodded. "Yes, indeed. She has a small studio there for her work." "May I ask?" "You may, madam," interrupted Poirot, smiling gently. "Last night, as I reviewed our little gathering in the drawing-room, something, a shadow, a movement, seemed to echo in my mind. I believe Mademoiselle Vale's eyes have seen something my own did not." At that, all eyes turned to Eleanor Vale. She blushed faintly. "My sketches? But they are trifles, Monsieur Poirot, nothing more than impressions." "Ah, mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, "it is often in the trifles that truth hides most easily." The gallery was bright with winter sunlight. Sketches of landscapes, portraits, and studies of flowers hung upon the pale walls. Easels were set at various angles, a faint scent of turpentine in the air. Poirot walked slowly about, his hands clasped behind his back, his sharp eyes absorbing every detail. Miss Vale followed nervously. "I sketched most of these last summer," she said. "I've always been fond of this light, it's so soft here in the mornings." Poirot paused before a sketch pinned to the far wall. It depicted the terrace and rose garden beneath a silvery moon. The shadows of the balustrade stretched long and strange across the flagstones. His gaze lingered on the faint outline of a figure, small, indistinct, drawn near one of the windows. "You see, mademoiselle," he said gently, "your hand betrays the eye that truly observes. Tell me, this sketch, when did you make it?" Miss Vale hesitated. "The night of the dinner party," she admitted. "I stepped out to capture the way the moonlight fell across the terrace. It was so still, I could not resist." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "But you said yesterday you went out only to fetch your sketchbook." She colored slightly. Well, I did both, I suppose. I took it up again for a few minutes. But I was not gone long." Poirot studied her silently, then turned back to the sketch. "This figure, mademoiselle, who was it?" "Yourself?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "It was someone else. I saw a shape by the window, a man, I think, though I could not tell who. I thought it rather spoiled the scene, but I added it anyway." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A man by the window. And which window, precisely?" She crossed the room and pointed to the one nearest the display case, the same window she had mentioned in her statement. Poirot's gaze followed her finger. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "And you are certain of the hour?" "Perhaps 9:30, she said softly. "No later." Poirot stood quite still, his head slightly tilted, as if listening to some inner clock. "Then," he said at last, "the thief was already in the room half an hour before the crime was discovered." Later that morning, Poirot summoned Dr. Felix Grant to the library. The doctor entered with his habitual air of composure, though there was a faint flicker of unease in his eyes. "Monsieur Poirot," he began, "Lady Miranda tells me you have discovered something new." "Something, yes," said Poirot. "Discovered, perhaps not yet." "Tell me, doctor, you were walking in the garden at 9:30. Grant nodded. "That's correct." "You would, then, have passed the terrace." I may have, the doctor replied cautiously. Poirot's voice grew very quiet. And you saw no one, no figure near the drawing-room window? Grant hesitated. No. The garden was empty. Poirot's eyes flashed. Then you contradict Mademoiselle Vale, who drew precisely such a figure at that very hour. Grant frowned. She must have been mistaken. The light can play tricks at night. Perhaps, said Poirot. Or perhaps, mon docteur, the eyes of an artist see more clearly than those of a man who wishes not to be seen. The doctor stiffened. Are you suggesting? Poirot raised a hand. I suggest nothing. I observe. You were out alone, you returned alone. You have, shall we say, the freedom of the house, and the knowledge of certain delicate mechanisms. Such knowledge, applied to a display case, might be most inconvenient. Grant's face hardened. If you mean to accuse me, do it plainly. Poirot smiled faintly. Accuse? Non. I simply collect the facts. Tuges les faits. But I thank you, monsieur, you have been most enlightening. Grant left in silence, his footsteps echoing sharply down the hall. That afternoon, Poirot walked once more along the terrace, hands tucked behind his back, his polished shoes leaving crisp prints on the frosted stone. Lady Miranda joined him, her fur collar drawn close against the cold. You think the doctor did it? She asked quietly. Poirot gave a little shrug. I think, madam, that everyone here has something they prefer I do not know. Colonel Penrose hides a letter he burnt last night, the ashes told me so. Mr. Lytton was not playing billiards for the entire hour, his cue was found quite untouched. Mrs. Hume locked the doors, but one key was not in its place this morning. Lady Miranda looked startled. You mean? I mean, said Poirot gently, that all have secrets. But only one has a secret that touches the emerald. He stopped suddenly, his gaze fixed upon the stone balustrade. There, caught between two cracks in the flagging, was a small scrap of something pale. Poirot bent, plucked it out carefully, and examined it in the palm of his gloved hand. It was a shred of fine linen, frayed at one end, and faintly stained with what looked like greenish dust. Ah, he murmured softly. The little clue that hides in plain sight. The thief, he has brushed against the very thing he stole. He folded the scrap neatly into a paper envelope and slipped it into his pocket. Lady Miranda looked at him in confusion. You believe that will lead you to the thief? Poirot smiled, eyes twinkling. My's OUI. Because, you see, madam, it tells me something most curious, that the jewel was not merely taken, but touched. Whoever stole it could not resist holding it in their hand. That is not the act of greed alone, it is the act of fascination. He turned toward the house, his step brisk. Come, Lady Miranda. The moment has come to look not for the hand that took, but the heart that desired. That evening, as the lamps were lit and the wind rose softly beyond the windows, Poirot retired to his room. On the table before him lay the sketch, the scrap of linen, and his small notebook filled with neat, precise writing. An artist's eye, a doctor's lie, a soldier's silence, a servant's routine, he murmured, tapping his pen thoughtfully. And yet, the pattern forms. Slowly, yes, but unmistakably. He closed the notebook with a snap and looked toward the darkened window. Tomorrow, he said softly, the mask begins to slip. Chapter 6, The Confession in the Night. A storm swept over Dovewood Hall that night, the first in weeks. The wind howled around the chimneys, rattling the windows like restless spirits, while the rain lashed against the panes in sudden bursts of fury. Inside, the great house seemed to hold its breath. Shadows moved across the corridors as candles guttered in their sconces, and the ancient timbers groaned under the force of the gale. Hercule Poirot sat in his room, perfectly calm amid the tempest. A small fire burned cheerfully in the hearth, and on the table before him lay his notebook, open at a page covered with neat, slanting script. Every line, every observation, every suspicion was written in Poirot's precise hand, a map of minds, motives, and lies. He had been waiting, quite still, for nearly an hour. There is always, he murmured softly, one who cannot sleep when the truth begins to stir. The conscience, it knocks, tap-tap, like a small, insistent hand upon the door of the heart. As if on cue, there came a timid knock at the door. Poirot smiled to himself. "Entrez," he called gently. The door opened a fraction, and Miss Eleanor Vale stepped hesitantly inside. Her face was pale, her hair unpinned, and her dressing gown clutched tightly at her throat. She looked both fragile and desperate. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, I had to speak to you. I cannot bear it any longer." Poirot rose at once, gesturing her toward the chair by the fire. "Sit down, mademoiselle. You are trembling." "Allow me," he poured a cup of hot chocolate from the small tray beside him and handed it to her. "Voila. The remedy for all distress, warmth and honesty." She gave a faint, grateful smile and took a sip. "You are very kind. I know you must think me foolish." "Foolish, no. Troubled, yes. But that is not the same thing. Now, parlez-moi, mademoiselle. Tell me why you cannot sleep." For a moment, she said nothing, staring into the flames as if trying to gather courage. Then, in a low, shaking voice, she began. "I have not been entirely truthful with you, Monsieur Poirot. About that night. I told you I saw only a shadow by the window. That was not entirely true." Poirot's eyes gleamed, though his tone remained gentle. "Ah? And what, precisely, did you see?" Her fingers tightened around the cup. "I saw a man, clearly. The moonlight fell across his face for an instant. I recognized him. It was Mr. Lytton." Poirot inclined his head slightly, as though this confirmed something he had already half suspected. "Continue, if you please." He was standing quite still, looking into the drawing room. "I was on the terrace, hidden behind one of the columns. He didn't see me. I thought he was admiring the garden, but then I realized he was watching the display case." "And what did he do then?" "He moved closer, and then, very suddenly, he stepped inside. The curtains moved behind him, and I couldn't see any more. I thought perhaps he had gone to fetch something. But later, when Lady Miranda cried out that the emerald was gone, she stopped, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. I was afraid to speak. I thought no one would believe me." Poirot regarded her thoughtfully. "Because you are fond of Mr. Lytton, perhaps." A flush rose to her cheeks. I suppose I was. He has been kind to me. He praised my work, said he would help me find an exhibition in London. I was foolish to trust him." Poirot gave a small nod. "The heart, mademoiselle, it is not foolish. It is only human. But tell me, did Mr. Lytton see you afterwards?" "I don't think so. But I believe he knows I know something. Yesterday he stopped me in the corridor and said," she shuddered. "He said I should be careful what I tell you, for some secrets are dangerous to share." For the first time, Poirot's expression darkened. "Ah. That is most interesting, and most unwise of him. A man who threatens betrays his own fear." He rose and began to pace, hands clasped behind his back. "You have done well to tell me this, mademoiselle. But we must proceed with caution. It may be that Mr. Lytton did indeed take the emerald, or it may be that he was there for some other reason entirely." She looked up anxiously. "What other reason could there be?" Poirot paused by the window, listening to the rain. "Let us say, par exemple, that he entered the room not to steal but to conceal. There are many forms of guilt, and not all concern jewels. Miss Vale's brow furrowed in confusion, but Poirot only smiled faintly. There is something else I must ask, mademoiselle. When you saw him, was he wearing gloves? She blinked, startled. Yes, I remember now. He wore dark gloves. It struck me as odd, for it was not cold then. Poirot nodded slowly. Just so. Gloves, the shadow, and the green dust on the scrap of linen, the little pattern grows clearer. He turned back to her, his expression softening. You have been brave, mademoiselle. But now you must be discreet. Tell no one of this visit. Pas unmot. Will you promise me that? I promise, she whispered. Poirot gave a small, approving bow. Très bien. You have lifted a corner of the veil, and I thank you. As she rose to leave, he added, almost gently, and one more thing, mademoiselle. Be careful tonight. It may be that someone else, too, has trouble sleeping. Her eyes widened. You think? I think, said Poirot, that when the mind of a thief grows desperate, it may do foolish things. And desperate men, they do not like witnesses. After she had gone, Poirot remained by the fire, thinking. The storm roared outside, but he heard only the ticking of his little travelling clock. Every fact now fitted into a shape, imperfect, yet recognizable. Lytton at the window. The linen scrap stained with green dust, perhaps from the velvet that lined the display case. The glove, the movement, the silence. But one question still troubled him. Why, he murmured, did he take such a risk? And if it was only greed, where is the emerald now? At that moment, a sharp sound interrupted his thoughts, a muffled cry, quickly stifled, somewhere down the corridor. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, candle in hand. The hallway beyond was dark and cold, the storm's roar seeping through the old windows. He moved swiftly toward the sound. A door stood ajar at the far end, Miss Vale's room. Poirot entered, and his keen eyes took in the scene at once, the overturned chair, the curtain stirring in the wind from an open window, and a faint trace of perfume in the air. The room was empty. Poirot stepped to the window, looking out into the storm. The rain drove against his face, but he could just make out footprints on the terrace below, leading toward the garden. Mon Dieu, he breathed. So the night has claimed its witness. He straightened, his face grave but composed. Now, he said softly, the game grows dangerous. And the time has come for Hercule Poirot to set the final trap. Chapter 7, The Trap at Dovewood Hall. Morning came slowly to Dovewood Hall, creeping pale and uncertain through the rain-washed windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a strange stillness, the kind that seems to wait for something to happen. Lady Miranda was already in the breakfast room when Poirot entered, immaculate as ever, though his expression was grave. Monsieur Poirot, she exclaimed. Is it true? They told me Miss Vale's bed was empty when they went to wake her. Poirot inclined his head. It is true, madam. The window was open, the ground below disturbed. But do not fear, I believe Mademoiselle Vale is still within these grounds. Indeed, I am counting upon it. Lady Miranda stared at him, bewildered. Counting upon it. Poirot gave a small smile. When one sets a trap, madam, one must have both the bait and the hunter. Last night, the hunter grew bold, and the bait vanished. It is a most interesting development. He poured himself coffee and stirred it precisely 3 times. You will oblige me, madam, by summoning everyone to the drawing-room at 11 o'clock. There are matters that must be set to rights. The appointed hour found the household assembled once more before the empty display case. The air was thick with unease. Colonel Penrose stood stiff and silent by the hearth. Dr. Grant polished his spectacles with nervous haste. Mrs. Hume clasped her hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. Charles Lytton, meanwhile, leaned indolently against the mantelpiece, though there was a tension about his posture that had not been there before. Poirot entered last, carrying a small, covered object beneath one arm. He placed it deliberately upon the table. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice calm but carrying clearly through the room, "the time has come to speak of what has been hidden. We are, all of us, entangled in a web of silence and deceit. But today, that web will be torn apart." A murmur went round the room. Lytton's eyes narrowed slightly. Poirot continued. "First, let us recall what we know. The Emerald of Alexandria was last seen at 9 o'clock 2 nights ago. The lock of its case was opened, not forced, by someone possessing either a key or knowledge of its mechanism. No sound was heard. No witness came forward. He began to pace slowly before them, his hands clasped neatly behind his back. Yet, we have certain small facts. Mademoiselle Vale saw a man by the window at 9:30. She believed it to be Mr. Lytton. A scrap of linen was found on the terrace, stained with green dust, the same shade as the velvet inside the display case. And our good Mrs. Hume tells us she found everything in order when she made her rounds at 10:30. Too much in order, perhaps. Mrs. Hume gave a startled gasp. "You mean?" "I mean," said Poirot, "that order can be as false as disorder, madam. You locked the doors, yes, but not all the keys were in their proper places, were they?" The housekeeper's lips parted, but no sound came. Poirot inclined his head gently. "You see? The human heart, it forgets nothing. You removed one key, did you not? But only because it was already missing earlier that evening." I only replaced it later," she stammered. "It was on the table by the servants' hall. I thought nothing of it." "Precisely," said Poirot softly. "And that, Mrs. Hume, is why you are innocent. A guilty person would never have returned the key at all." He turned to the others. "No, our thief did not come from below stairs. They came from among those privileged to move freely about the house, someone confident, accustomed to being trusted." His gaze came to rest on Charles Lytton. "Mr. Lytton," he said quietly, "perhaps you would explain what you were doing on the terrace at 9:30. Lytton's expression remained composed, though a faint muscle flickered in his jaw. "I've already told you. I was playing billiards." "Alone," said Poirot. "Yet no chalk dust on your cuffs, no record of the game upon the score sheet, and the balls untouched since the previous evening." "Non, monsieur. You were not in the billiard room. You were here." Lytton's lips curved in a faint smile. "You have quite an imagination, Poirot." "Not imagination, observation," said Poirot crisply. "You were seen. And later you threatened the one who saw you." A murmur rippled through the group. Lytton's eyes flashed. "Who told you that?" Poirot raised a delicate hand. "You will know soon enough. But first, there is another matter." He removed the cloth from the object on the table, revealing a small wooden box. From within, he drew out a single, brilliant stone, glowing deep green even in the pale light. Gasps filled the room. Lady Miranda clutched the back of a chair for support. "The emerald," she breathed. "You found it?" Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Indeed. I found it early this morning, in the garden tool shed, beneath a loose board. Wrapped in a pair of leather gloves." At that, Lytton's composure cracked for the first time. His eyes darted toward the door, then back to Poirot. "That proves nothing. Anyone could have placed it there," interrupted Poirot. Ah, but only one pair of gloves was missing from the rack in the cloakroom. Your pair, monsieur. Lytton took a step forward, his voice rising. This is absurd. I didn't steal it. Poirot's tone softened. No, I do not believe you did, at least, not for yourself. You are clever, yes, but your cleverness serves another. There was, I think, a woman. A woman who held you in her debt. She asked for your help, and you, le pauvre Charles, could not refuse. Lytton froze, colour draining from his face. Poirot continued, voice low and relentless. The theft was not your idea. You were only to open the case, to make it appear as if nothing were amiss. The true motive was not theft, but protection. You sought to hide the emerald from one who meant to sell it. He turned suddenly toward the doorway. Is that not so, Mademoiselle Vale? All heads turned, for Eleanor Vale stood there, pale and trembling, her hair damp from the morning air. A gasp escaped Lady Miranda. Eleanor, she cried. Where have you been? Miss Vale stepped into the room slowly. I had to come back, she said softly. I couldn't let him take the blame. Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. Voila! The final piece falls into place. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. You know everything, don't you? Nearly everything, said Poirot gently. But I should like to hear it in your own words. Her voice shook as she spoke. I found out that my brother, you remember, Monsieur Poirot, the one who got into trouble with debts, was being blackmailed. Someone in London learned that Lady Miranda had once purchased the emerald without proper certification. They threatened to expose her and ruin the family name unless she paid. I wanted to protect her. I thought if I hid the jewel for a while, the blackmailer would lose interest. I asked Charles to help me open the case. Poirot nodded slowly. You meant well, mademoiselle. But good intentions, they are dangerous things. You deceived your friends, and you placed yourself in great peril. She lowered her head. I see that now. Lady Miranda stepped forward, eyes glistening. My dear girl, if only you'd told me. Poirot raised a hand gently. There will be time for forgiveness later, madam. For now, let us be thankful that the emerald is safe, and that the truth, at last, begins to shine through the lies. He looked from one face to another, his expression calm and grave. But remember, one question remains. Someone outside this house still knows of the emerald's existence. Someone who will not stop so easily. The danger, Miss Amis, is not yet over. Chapter 8, The Final Revelation. A hush fell over the drawing room. The fire had burned low, casting long, uncertain shadows upon the walls, as though the house itself held its breath. The emerald lay upon the table between them, a glimmer of green light, innocent and yet the cause of so much fear and deceit. Lady Miranda stood by the window, her hand pressed to her throat. Eleanor Vale sat motionless, her eyes red from weeping. Charles Lytton had turned away, his jaw clenched, while Colonel Penrose and Dr. Grant stood side by side, silent and uneasy. Hercule Poirot, calm and composed, regarded them all with grave satisfaction. His small frame seemed to command the room by sheer force of intellect. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but every syllable fell with the precision of a blade. Miss Amis, we have reached the end. The facts are clear, yet there is one truth still hidden, one motive yet unspoken. Allow me, if you please, to put my little grey cells in order before you. He began to pace slowly before the hearth, his hands clasped neatly behind his back. Let us recall, he said, how the case began. A theft without violence, a lock opened and relocked, a night filled with shadows and silence. Each of you told me your story, and each story contained a small lie, not of guilt, but of fear. Colonel Penrose feared scandal, Mrs. Hume feared dismissal, Miss Vale feared discovery. Yet none of these, I think, stole the emerald for greed. He paused, glancing toward Lady Miranda. But there is a fourth fear, the fear of ruin. That, I believe, is the heart of our mystery. Lady Miranda's lips parted. Ruin? Poirot bowed slightly. Oh, madam. You were being blackmailed, were you not? She turned pale. How could you possibly? It was simple. You see, the letter that Colonel Penrose burnt in the library, the ashes were faintly scented with violet ink, a perfume rarely used except in ladies' correspondence. Yet the handwriting upon the unburnt corner was not his. It was yours, madam. You had written a note to him asking for his advice about the demand. You feared he might guess the truth. Colonel Penrose looked startled. By Jove, you knew. Poirot inclined his head. The Colonel is a man of honor. He burnt the letter not to conceal guilt, but to protect his hostess. Admirable, yet futile. Lady Miranda sank into a chair. It is true, she whispered. A man wrote to me from London. He claimed to know that the emerald had been obtained privately from a collector in Cairo, and that certain export permits were lacking. He threatened to inform the authorities if I did not pay him £5,000. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And did you know this man's name? She hesitated. He called himself Mr. Felix Grant. There was a sharp intake of breath. Every head turned toward the doctor. He stiffened, color draining from his face. That's absurd. I never? But you did, said Poirot softly. You see, monsieur, when I first met you, I was struck by something odd. You spoke of walking in the garden on the night of the theft, but there was no trace of mud upon your shoes the next morning. Only a fine greenish dust, the same I found upon the scrap of linen. Grant's composure faltered. Coincidence? No, said Poirot firmly. It was the dust from the velvet inside the display case. You handled it, did you not? With gloves, to leave no fingerprints. The same gloves, monsieur, that were found in the shed this morning, the gloves belonging to Mr. Lytton, yes, but borrowed from the cloakroom the evening before. You returned them later, hoping suspicion would fall elsewhere. The doctor's eyes darted from face to face, searching for support. This is madness. You've no proof I stole anything. Poirot smiled faintly. On the contrary. I have all the proof I need. Your handwriting, monsieur, is distinctive, the flourish on the letter G, the long tail of the T. It matches perfectly the blackmailer's letter I recovered from Lady Miranda's desk. And last night, when you saw that Mademoiselle Vale had confided in me, you feared exposure. You went to her room, not to harm her, perhaps, but to silence her with persuasion. Eleanor shuddered. I heard someone outside before I was taken. I thought it was the wind. Poirot nodded gravely. The storm provided excellent cover. But the footprints on the terrace told me the rest, large, heavy prints, with a slight inward turn of the right foot. That is your gait, Dr. Grant. The Army medical records confirm it. There was a long silence. The fire crackled softly. At last, Dr. Grant gave a short, bitter laugh. You're very clever, Monsieur Poirot. But tell me this, why would I, a respectable physician, stoop to blackmail? Poirot's gaze hardened. Because you were desperate. 5 years ago, you lost heavily in a fraudulent investment scheme. Your creditors pursued you even here. You knew Lady Miranda's secret and used it. But when the time came to collect, you realized the emerald itself was worth far more. So you took it, intending to sell it abroad. The doctor's shoulders slumped. And I would have succeeded, too, if not for that meddling girl. Poirot's eyes glinted. My's OUI. It is always the small detail that unravels the great plan. Mademoiselle Vale's sketch, that innocent work of art, captured your shadow at the window. You thought no one had seen you. But art, you see, never lies. Grant sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. It's over, then? Yes, said Poirot quietly. It is over. He turned to the others. You see, Miss Amos, the theft, the lies, the fears, they were all threads in the same tapestry. Each one acted from protection or pride. But only one acted from greed. That is the difference between guilt and folly. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lady Miranda rose slowly and crossed to Poirot. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice trembling, you have given me back not only my jewel, but my peace. How can I ever thank you? Poirot smiled gently. By remembering, madam, that secrets are more dangerous than scandals. The truth, it is always the safest treasure. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Poirot turned toward the window, gazing out at the bright winter morning breaking through the clouds. And now, he said softly, my work here is done. The emerald will return to its rightful place, but perhaps, this time, behind glass more humble. Charles Lytton, pale but defiant, spoke suddenly. You might have told me you suspected him, Poirot. I nearly confessed to save her. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Ah, but that was precisely why I could not tell you, monsieur. To catch a man who uses fear, one must allow him to believe his power still holds. It was necessary for him to feel he had the advantage, until, of course, he no longer did. There was a faint smile among the group, the first in days. The air, at last, seemed lighter. Poirot adjusted his cuffs and gave a small, contented sigh. Now, if you will excuse me, I shall take a little walk in the garden. After all, one must admire the English countryside, even when it hides such wickedness beneath its charm. Outside, the morning sun touched the frost-tipped roses with light. Poirot walked alone across the terrace, his shoes crunching softly upon the gravel. Behind him, Dovewood Hall stood once more serene and dignified, as though nothing had ever disturbed its peace. Ah, he murmured to himself, smiling faintly, the case of the Emerald of Alexandria, a study, not in crime, but in conscience. And voila, how the smallest of sketches can reveal the largest of truths. He paused, glancing back at the grand old house, then tipped his hat to the rising sun. It is finished, said Hercule Poirot. And once again, order has been restored.